December 25th, 1863. While America tore itself apart in Civil War, while Union soldiers sang hymns around campfires, while Confederate families prayed for their sons to return home alive, one man in Clark County, Georgia, made a decision that would destroy him forever. His name was Silas Hargrove, plantation owner, Methodist church deacon, father of 3, and on that Christmas morning, he sold 12 enslaved children for $8,400. But here's what they don't tell you in history books. By sunrise on December 26th, something had happened to Silas Hargrove, something that changed him so completely, so violently, that 9 years later when he died in 1872, his obituary wouldn't even mention his family name. The children he tried to sell, they never left the plantation. The buyer who arrived that morning, he left empty-handed, furious, threatening legal action. And Silas Hargrove, the man who built his fortune on the backs of enslaved people for 23 years, he spent the rest of his life trying to undo everything he'd done. If this story inspired you and you'd like to hear more like it, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. This is the story of what happened on the night of December 24th, 1863, the night that broke a slaveholder's soul. Silas Hargrove wasn't born into slavery wealth. His father was a blacksmith in Athens, Georgia, respectable working class, nothing more. But in 1840, at age 22, Silas married Margaret Thornton, daughter of a plantation owner with 600 acres and 47 enslaved people. When Margaret's father died in 1843, Silas inherited everything, and he learned quickly. Cotton prices in 1844, 11 cents per pound. Silas's first harvest, 42,000 pounds. Profit, $4,620. By 1850, he owned 63 enslaved people. By 1860, that number had grown to 81. His plantation journals, discovered in 1891 in a locked trunk in his abandoned study, show a man obsessed with efficiency. He tracked everything: work output per person per day, medical costs versus replacement costs, pregnancy rates and infant survival rates. To Silas Hargrove, enslaved people weren't human beings, they were investments. And like any investment, sometimes you had to liquidate assets to cover losses. By December 1863, the Civil War had devastated Georgia's economy. Confederate currency nearly worthless. Cotton exports blocked by Union naval blockades. Labor force. 12 of Silas's enslaved men had already escaped to Union lines. His plantation journals from November 1863 show increasingly desperate calculations. November 8th, cotton rotting in fields, cannot hire enough hands to harvest, lost 40% of crop. November 19th, bank demands payment, $6,200 due by January 1st, no cash reserves. November 27th, visited by Thomas Wickham, offers to purchase 12 young Negroes for labor in Alabama mines, $700 per head, must decide. Thomas Wickham was a labor broker. He didn't buy enslaved people to work them on farms. He bought children, specifically children ages 4 to 14, to work in coal mines, turpentine camps, and railroad construction, places where adult enslaved people died too quickly to be profitable. Children were cheaper, easier to control, and when they died, you just bought more. On December 10, 1863, Silas Hargrove wrote in his journal, "Deal struck with Wickham. 12 children to be delivered Christmas Day. $8,400 total, enough to clear debt and purchase seed for spring planting. Margaret does not know. Will tell her after New Year. God forgive me." He selected the children himself. 12 names appear in his ledger, dated December 10, 1863. Elijah, 14 years old. Sarah, 12. Thomas, 11. Rebecca, 10. Moses, 9. Abigail, 8. Joshua, 7. Mary, 7. Samuel, 6. Grace, 5. Isaac, 5. Ruth, 4. 3 sets of siblings, 2 sets of twins, all born on the plantation, all about to be sold on Christmas Day. December 24, 1863, 11:47 p.m. Silas Hargrove's personal journal, written in 1864, 1 year after the event, describes what happened that night. He couldn't sleep. His wife Margaret and their 3 children were asleep upstairs. The house was silent, but outside, from the quarters where the enslaved families lived, he could hear singing Christmas hymns. Silent Night, Go Tell It on the Mountain, Mary Had a Baby, voices of mothers, fathers, children, including the 12 children he was selling in 9 hours. In his journal, he wrote, "I rose from bed at 1:45, put on my coat, took the lantern, told myself I would walk the property to check the fences, but I knew the truth. I wanted to see them one last time." He walked to the quarters, stood outside the largest cabin where families gathered on Christmas Eve. The singing stopped, the door opened, and one by one they came out. Not the adults, the 12 children. Elijah, the oldest, stood in front, 14 years old, born the same year Silas married Margaret. Silas wrote, "They stood before me in a line, barefoot in the cold, silent, staring, and I realized they knew. Somehow they knew what I'd done." No one spoke. Then Elijah stepped forward, and according to Silas's journal, this is what he said. "Mr. Hargrove, we know you're selling us tomorrow. We know we're going to the mines. My mama told me she heard you talking to Mr. Wickchick." Silas tried to respond, tried to justify it, tried to say it was business, but Elijah kept talking. "We want to show you something, sir." And one by one, the children stepped forward. Sarah, 12 years old, showed him her hands, scarred from years of picking cotton. Thomas, 11, lifted his shirt, whip marks from an overseer's punishment 6 months earlier. Rebecca, 10, turned around. Her back bore the same scars. Moses, 9, showed him a broken finger that had never healed properly. Each child, one by one, showed Silas Hargrove the physical evidence of the life they'd been born into, the life he'd profited from, the life he was about to sell them away from, not to freedom, but to something far worse. And then Ruth, the youngest, 4 years old, walked up to him. She didn't show him scars. She just looked up at him and said, "I'm scared." Silas Hargrove wrote, "That was the moment I broke. Not from anger, not from guilt, but from something deeper. I looked at Ruth, 4 years old, and I saw my own daughter. I saw Margaret. I saw myself, and I realized I had spent 23 years convincing myself that these children weren't human, that they didn't feel pain the way my children did, that they didn't fear death the way I did. And in one sentence, I'm scared. That entire lie shattered." He stood there, surrounded by 12 children under a winter sky, and for the first time in his life, Silas Hargrove saw them as human beings. At 6 a.m. on December 25, 1863, Thomas Wickham arrived at Hargrove Plantation with a wagon and 4 armed men. He expected to load 12 children and leave with $8,400 worth of human property. Instead, Silas Hargrove met him at the gate, and according to Wickham's own legal complaint filed January 3, 1864, and discovered in Clark County Courthouse records in 1923, this is what Silas said. "The deal is off. The children are not for sale. You need to leave." Wickham was furious. He threatened legal action, breach of contract, fraud. He demanded compensation for travel expenses. Silas handed him $200 in Confederate currency, all the cash he had left, and repeated, "The children are not for sale. Leave my property." Wickham left, and Silas Hargrove walked to the quarters where 81 enslaved people lived. He called everyone together, men, women, children, and he made an announcement that no one expected. He was freeing them. Not after the war, not gradually, immediately. Here's the reality of what happened next. In December 1863, Georgia was still under Confederate control. The Emancipation Proclamation, signed January 1, 1863, only freed enslaved people in Union-controlled territories. Silas Hargrove had no legal authority to free anyone, but he did it anyway. According to testimony collected in 1923 by historian Marion Abrams, who interviewed descendants of the Hargrove Plantation's formerly enslaved community, 37 people left immediately. They headed north toward Union lines in Tennessee. 44 people stayed. Why? Because Silas made them an offer. Stay on the plantation, work the land, and he would pay them wages, not enslaved labor, paid labor. He also offered something unprecedented, land ownership. He divided his 600 acres into parcels and promised that anyone who stayed and worked for 5 years would receive title to their own land. And he did something even more shocking. He established a school, not for his own children, for the 12 children he tried to sell, and for every other child on the plantation. He hired a teacher, a free black woman named Constance Ellis from Athens, Georgia, and paid her salary out of his own dwindling funds. By spring 1864, 32 children were attending school, including Elijah, Sarah, Thomas, Rebecca, Moses, Abigail, Joshua, Mary, Samuel, Grace, Isaac, and Ruth, the 12 children who'd stood before him that Christmas Eve night. Silas Hargrove's decision destroyed him financially. By 1865, he'd lost everything. His wife Margaret left him in June 1864, taking their 3 children back to her family in Athens. She never spoke to him again. His neighbors, other plantation owners, shunned him. They called him a traitor, a Negro lover, a madman. The Confederate government tried to prosecute him for aiding enemy combatants. The case was dismissed in April 1865, when the Civil War ended, but the damage was done. By 1866, Silas Hargrove owned nothing. The plantation was seized for unpaid debts, the land he'd promised to the formerly enslaved workers taken by creditors. Silas moved into a 2-room cabin on the edge of the property, and he spent the next 6 years working as a farmhand for the same people he'd once enslaved. Testimony from Elijah Freeman, formerly enslaved on Hargrove Plantation, recorded in 1902. Mr. Hargrove worked alongside us. He never asked for special treatment. He never complained. When we got paid, he got paid the same. And every Sunday he would visit the school he'd started. He'd sit in the back and watch the children read. He never said much, but you could see it in his eyes. He was trying to make up for what he'd done, trying to earn forgiveness. Silas Hargrove died on March 14, 1872, at age 54. Cause of death, tuberculosis. He owned nothing, had no family present, left no will, but his funeral was attended by 83 people, all of them formerly enslaved on his plantation. And they did something extraordinary. They buried him in the Freedmen's Cemetery, not the White Cemetery. They planted 12 oak trees around his grave, one for each child he tried to sell. Here's where the story gets complicated. In 1891, a historian named Douglas Pettin was researching plantation records in Clark County, Georgia. He discovered Silas Hargrove's personal journals in an abandoned study. The journals contained detailed accounts of plantation operations from 1843 to 1872. But one entry dated December 24, 1863, stood out. It was written a year after the event, in December 1864, and it described something that couldn't be rationally explained. Silas wrote, "When the children stood before me that night, I felt something I cannot describe. It was not guilt, it was not fear. It was as though I could feel every pain they had ever felt, every hunger, every cold night, every moment of fear. It was not a vision. It was not a dream. It was as though their suffering became mine. For those minutes, however long it lasted, I experienced 23 years of pain in compressed form, and when it ended, I was not the same man." Was this a psychological break? A moment of moral awakening so intense it felt supernatural? Or did something else happen that night? In 1979, historian Rebecca Turner interviewed descendants of the 12 children. She recorded a story that had been passed down through 5 generations. On Christmas Eve, 1863, the 12 children made a pact. They held hands in a circle, they prayed, and they asked God to make Silas Hargrove feel what they felt, to break his heart the way their hearts had been broken. Is that what happened? Did collective prayer, collective desperation, somehow reach a man who'd spent decades ignoring human suffering? Or was Silas Harrow simply a man who, in one moment of clarity, finally saw the truth? We'll never know for certain. Let me tell you what happened to the 12 children. Elijah Freeman became a schoolteacher, founded 3 schools for formerly enslaved children in Georgia, died 1921, age 72. Sarah Freeman became a midwife, delivered over 600 babies in Clark County, died 1924, age 73. Thomas Freeman became a carpenter, built the first black-owned church in Athens, Georgia, died 1918, age 66. Rebecca Washington became a seamstress and business owner, died 1928, age 75. Moses Jackson became a minister, led a congregation in Athens for 43 years, died 1920, age 66. Abigail Jackson became a teacher, worked at the school Silas Hargrove founded until 1911, died 1933, age 78. Joshua Brooks became a blacksmith, inherited his father's trade, died 1915, age 59. Mary Brooks became a cook and cookbook author, published Freedman's Kitchen in 1898, died 1940, age 84. Samuel Porter became a farmer, owned 40 acres by 1890, died 1927, age 70. Grace Porter became a nurse, worked in Atlanta hospitals, died 1935, age 77. Isaac Taylor became a railroad worker and labor organizer, died 1910, age 52. Ruth Taylor, the little girl who said, "I'm scared," to silence, Hargrove, became a writer, published her memoir, Sold on Christmas, in 1919, died 1942, age 83. All 12 children survived. All 12 built lives, raised families, contributed to their communities, and every year on December 24th, their descendants gather at Silas Hargrove's grave at the 12 oak trees, and they tell this story. So here's what we know. On December 24, 1863, a slaveholder named Silas Hargrove stood face to face with 12 children he'd planned to sell into brutal labor. Something happened that night, something that changed him so completely that he spent the rest of his life trying to undo 23 years of cruelty. Was it guilt? Was it a spiritual awakening? Was it simply the first time he allowed himself to see enslaved people as human? We'll never know for certain, but here's what I do know. 12 children aged 4 to 14 survived. They weren't sold. They weren't sent to die in Alabama coal mines. They lived, they thrived, they raised families, and their descendants, over 300 people today, exist because one man, on one night, made a different choice. Not because he was a hero, but because 12 children refused to be invisible. They stood in front of him, they showed them their scars, they made him see them. And sometimes that's all it takes to change the world. One moment, one choice, one act of moral courage, even from the most unlikely person. If you found this story powerful, share it. The descendants of these 12 children deserve to have their ancestors' courage remembered.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of this video. If you'd like to hear more similar stories, subscribe to the channel right now, like the video, and share your thoughts with us in the comments section.